Whiskey, to me, was the whiskey people seemed a little edgy. I used to run restaurants and nightclubs. I could drink a bottle of Johnny Walker Black in a night. Where I started to get more interested in whiskey, this was about the start of, I have about, in my personal collection, a little over 800 bottles. Every whiskey company should sell bread. Their sherry casks that they finish in are like next level. I don't want everything to be perfect. Whatever's coming from here hurts me. Some of these barrels look like if you and me were going to go to the hospital and you got like 12 things on your chest. When you made that whiskey 50 years ago, it probably didn't cost you very much. I mean, I'm totally fine with paying a premium for great stuff. Nothing is worth anything until you actually sell it and get the money. Like in the 1980s, nobody wanted the whiskey. Johnny Walker Black or Red seems to be like, I swear, 90% of the people's first whiskey experience. Why is that bottle $50,000?
What is the most special bottle that you have in your collection? Hello everyone, this is the Peat podcast, and today my guest is Gavin Linde. He is the #1 whiskey influencer in the world. He has an extensive whiskey collection, and he shares his passion for whiskey on Instagram at Rolex Whisky. He is also the host of Rolex Whisky Passion Project, and besides his passion for whiskey, he is a realtor and a VP for natural grocery brands. Welcome, Gavin. It's very nice to meet you.
You too, my friend. Thanks for having me on.
Of course, this was a long time coming. We were trying to organize this, but finally.
Hey, busy people and a time change doesn't help.
Yeah, exactly. Are you in San Diego right now, or are you
in San Diego? Then next week Connecticut, then the following week Chicago, then home, then the following week Minneapolis, then home. Yeah, a lot.
Yeah, that sounds busy. Okay, so I think we should start with your passion for whiskey. Disclaimer, I'm not a whiskey specialist, I'm a wine specialist, but I think it would be great to learn together with our viewers. I'm sure some of our viewers are more knowledgeable on whiskey, some are new to it. So I think we should start with a little introduction into the whiskey culture, and then your story. How did you get into it, and how did your story start?
So story started a long time ago. Grew up, I'm actually born and raised in Cape Town, South Africa.
Oh, wow.
And we grew up drinking whiskey. But whiskey was more like, I was talking to someone yesterday. Whiskey, to me, was people that were like a little edgy. They were drinking whiskey. The other people were drinking, gin and tonic or, tequila or wine or champagne. The whiskey people seemed a little edgy. But if I think back of those memories of drinking whiskey, we were putting so much ice in it. It was like water flavored whiskey, really cold. So we weren't really like, we were drinking whiskey, but we weren't like, that thing when you drink something high alcohol and you're like, whoa. That wasn't happening. It was full of ice, and it was blended whiskey, which is very nice, but it's a very low ABV. So my whole life, I've been drinking low ABV whiskey, primarily J&B and Johnny Walker Black. When I used to run restaurants and nightclubs, I could drink a bottle of Johnny Walker Black in a night because I would just constantly, many hours, 8 hours working, drink a bottle because it's just what I enjoyed drinking. It wasn't until almost 10 years ago where I started to get more interested in whiskey. This was about the start of Japanese whiskey was coming out, and I was like, oh, that's really interesting. I wonder what a Japanese whiskey tasted like. And then I tasted one and I'm like, whoa, whoever made this whiskey, like their level of excellence was very high because nobody wanted it. So in my mind, I said, man, if you're going to make a whiskey this good, you're pretty confident because, nobody needs it. Nobody cares. 10 years ago. Kind of crazy how it is now. And then my second kid, my first daughter, she was born premature. And so she came out 5 weeks early, and she was in the NICU for 2 weeks, the ICU for the babies. And a friend of mine in Detroit had an issue getting whiskey to Detroit because just the allocations, and he's like, I need to get more whiskey. And I was like, so we just started thinking through ideas, and I said, how cool would it be if I start investing in whiskey and make it like a alternative investment strategy? Because I would get really tired of going to my money manager, every 6 months and telling me how, oh God, look, I made 7%. And I'm like, oh, the market's up like 100. How you make 7? You know? So I was like, and the worst case scenario, drink it.
Yeah.
So I started buying whiskey, and here we are. I mean, the whole strategy is a 15-year strategy. The goal is when my first kid goes to college, sell it all and pay for it. And you know, Mason's going to be 11 this week, so like maybe 7 years left of this, and nothing but fun, to be honest. I have about, in my personal collection, a little over 800 bottles of rare whiskey, and I have about 300 bottles open. And I drink it all, like Irish, Japanese, Thai, Scotch, American bourbons and ryes, you know, Indiana bourbons and ryes, Tennessee bourbons, you know, I drink it all because now I geek out on how hard it is to make whiskey.
Yeah.
Good whiskey.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's a process. Like, you have to be committed. This is not like, my joke is, this is not something you throw in the microwave and hit 1 minute and then, oh, here it's ready. Like, it's a process, and you have to be committed, and people are committed at different levels. It's also, as you know, in the wine space, it goes back centuries. And kind of imagining what it was like for whiskey, the 1800s, you know, building a distillery. You know, you got no cars, no nothing. You got a railway, kind of. You got boats. So now you got to put the rocks. I mean, there's no bricks. There's no cement. You have to figure out how to like stick them together. You have to get copper and like hammer it in and test. I mean, I couldn't even imagine in the 1800s, you know? And so, and the same in wine, you know, you go to these vineyards and you're like, wait, these guys have been making wine for so many years. And like, when they started, it was like them and a horse and a donkey and a grape.
Yeah.
And even worse, I think nobody cared. Nobody wanted it. Nobody understood how good it was. It was literally like, hey, I'm doing it, but like, So
yeah, it was like a commodity.
Yeah.
Just.
Yeah, it's a job. I make wine, I make whiskey, I make gin. Let's say, you know, like, you don't get to see the consumer at the end who says, oh my God, that was delicious. You might get somebody, imagine in the 1800s, like, knocks on the door. Hi, I'd like to try the wine. Hey, I'd like to try the whiskey. And you're like, what you doing here? Why are you here? You know?
Yeah, exactly. Let's explain to the viewers how whiskey is made, because I think there are lots of misconceptions. They are confusing it with other spirits. So let's clarify the
for
whiskey process.
It's really it's grains, and it's, you know, it's barleys and rye, and it basically ferments in a mash tun, and then they heat it up, and then this liquid comes, this like vapor turns into liquid, and then that liquid comes out, and then all the other stuff, it almost is like a beer. It's like taking everything to make a beer and heating it up to a really crazy temperature, and then putting it in this giant thing, this still, and heating it up to a really high temperature, and then getting the vapor, and then it gets this very, like, it's a very fruity liquid that comes out. It's white, you know, some, depending on where you are, they have different names for it, but it's a very high alcohol volume liquid. And then it's with that liquid, they put it into different barrels. Now, you know, in for bourbon, it needs American oak, and it's different for Scotland. Like, every country has a different thing of what they call. But at the end of the day, you're taking this clear liquid, very high alcohol, and depending on the grains that you're using, things taste different. But in general, all this liquid that I've ever tasted is always very fruity. You know, some is more strawberry forward, some is more peach forward. It just depends on what the barley that they're using, or what the grains or the rye or the millets and all that kind of stuff, that whatever the mash bill is, it's like whatever their recipe is of grains to make the whole thing is what it yields, but it's always got fruit to it. And sometimes you get like a cereal note or a biscuit note or a chocolate note, and you're like, that's just the grain. I think the coolest thing that I ever saw was in person, and I'm sure I've seen it in other places, like just saw it again. But the first time I saw this was Maker's Mark, you know, big bourbon company, big whiskey company, almost every country in the world, plenty of Maker's Mark. But the husband and wife, when they were trying to make it and decide what recipe they were going to go with, they made bread, because you can. grains. You can make bread. You put it in a thing, boom, you add some yeast and now you've got bread. And they were tasting the bread to be like, that's the ingredient, that's the grain mix we want to have.
Oh, wow.
And I'd never seen that. And just 2 weeks ago, I was in Scotland for Macallan's 200-year anniversary. And at dinner, they served the bread made with the way Macallan makes their whiskey. And I'm like, this is what every whiskey company should sell bread. It'd be so cool. so yeah, it's all different and all unique, but they all kind of come back together. Whenever I see it, like no matter who I'm with, whatever we are, it always starts from a clear liquid. And then it's like Mother Nature, it's wood, it's barrels, it's climates. A whiskey from India can mature 9 years in like 5 because it's so hot there that the wood just swells all the way out. And then, when it comes back in, Taiwanese whiskey, same, matures really fast. Scotland takes a long time. It's cold. Some of the places I went to are on the water, so it's even colder. So like this, think of like our lives with wood. If you've ever, like, the door is stuck in the summer and then the door closes really easy in the winter. Imagine that on a massive scale with a liquid inside.
Exactly. Are they also playing with different yeast types that they use?
There is a play. Of course, everyone has their like house recipe to get the bubbles going, the starter. That's been around for years, but like just it's same. Like I always just go back to like baking bread. Like everyone has a unique twist to it that gives them what they call their house flavor.
I see. What was the flavor? What was the most interesting thing about Japanese whiskey that draw you in at the beginning?
To be honest, their sherry casks that they finish in are like next level. Like you think about sherry, if you've ever drank it, it's very thick and viscous. And imagine what that leaves on the inside of a barrel. And then you clean it out, and then you put the whiskey in, and you let the whiskey sit for years. And that flavor starts to come in. I just felt that whatever the sherry that they were using was like next level.
I see, yeah.
Because just think about the commodity of sherry barrels. We might know 2 people in our lives that drink sherry, yet they make a lot of sherry. And you go, where does the sherry go? Well, it's been for Scotch whiskey for 1 million years. Like Spain, Jerez, like literally supplies all of that. And now in 2024, everybody's buying it. Everyone's even like we've gotten to this point where there's so much demand, but so little supply of everything, grains, wood, water, you name it. So like, how are they doing it? So everybody's like, oh, you know what? I can't get American oak anymore. Here's the thing that blew me away. A big tree only gets 4 barrels.
Yeah.
And you just think like, whoa, there's millions of barrels going around.
And they are changing
it all the trees, time. And how can you grow them that fast? So that's why you're starting to see finished whiskeys. Oh, we're finishing it in port. Oh, we're finishing it. I mean, I've seen everything now, stuff that I can't even pronounce. Like, oh, we finished in there. I drank a Pedro Jimenez barrel the other day. It was delicious. I just saw Australian Shiraz wine. That barrel used for whiskey. Delicious.
Wow.
So just like there's all of that happens to make the flavor of whiskey. All of that has to happen. And it's also unique. And everybody who makes whiskey is like their own artist.
Yeah.
Like when I meet these people, I'm just like, whoa, that's crazy. You've been doing this for 55 years and you're still happy and excited. Oh, I love it. Why? Because they get to experiment. Like you already know that the white liquid is good. What can you do with it now?
Exactly. The play is infinite.
Oh, infinite. And seeing how much wine barrels are being used now.
Yeah.
I had a red wine, Ichiro's malts, delicious. They just did it again. Great liquid. Hey, great red wine. I mean, I've seen in some of these distilleries, I've seen some of the top winemakers' barrels sitting there that they're going to put whiskey in. Now, listen, a lot of it's for also pomp and ceremony. I don't know if a whiskey finished in Chateau Mouton barrels is better than a whiskey filled in another wine's barrel. I don't know. It may be. my palate probably couldn't pick, but it's pretty cool to say that you finished it in some Rothschild barrels. You know?
Exactly.
And the
Exactly.
guys from Rothschild are like, oh my God, we can sell our barrels? We didn't know what to do with them.
I wonder if they charge more for their empty and used barrels than like a normal used barrel.
I mean, there's got
Probably.
to be, I mean, you know, the whole world revolves around money, and now it's like a commodity. Oh, wait, we can get that barrel that we can't ever use again. Oh, yeah, no. We're going to sell it to the whiskey guys.
It's the Mouton barrel.
Oh, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
I literally, I saw that twice now. And I was just, Dalmore, Richard Patterson, he does a lot of wine finishes. I mean, and he's got a huge wine collection. So he's like the guy who buys them all. And then he puts Dalmore in there, and he's like, this one I did in the Mouton, and then I went to the Methuselah of this, and I went to him. He's like, whoa, what's going on? You know? And it's delicious. And he'll age it for like no joke. I drank a 52-year-old that was aged in like 2 wine barrels, 1 port barrel, and I was like, it was crazy because with that white liquid, you get to be what I call like Iron Chef. You're like, today, here is the liquid. Make me 6 dishes. And they're like, all right, we're going to do 1 sherry, 1 wine, 1 bourbon finish. I mean, the Scotch guys buy the bourbon barrels because it takes off the bitterness. And the bourbon guys buy the Scotch barrels because it adds a little bit of extra like sweetness. So it's a beautiful like global phenomenon how all these barrels move around. But lately, a lot of wine.
I see. The base liquid sounds like we have this saying in wine. We say that you can make. It's easy to make good wine from good grapes, but it's very challenging to make good wine in a challenging vintage. And this must be the case with the base liquid. If the liquid must be good, and then you can start.
You can't because you know what the thing is. You put it away for so many years, you can't mess it up.
Yeah.
You know, like just think of it like these guys making 120 million liters per year, 35 million liters per year. And you're like, whoa, like that's a lot of liquid. Like we better make sure it's good, you know, and then they have all kinds of things. It has to go in at the right level of alcohol. So you get the right liquid. Like it's like to think about the science over the last 200 years, the science really hasn't changed. The technology has changed.
Yeah.
You know, when I talk to people, when I go to distilleries now and it's instead of people, it's just computers everywhere. And I go, what's going on? And they say, well, nothing's changed, but we don't have to have 7 people telling us what the computer can tell us.
Yeah.
I personally don't like it, but it's what's happening. And that the end result, when I ask these guys, what's different to the whiskey then to the whiskey now, the whiskey now is cleaner because the computers can pick up the impurities. I don't know if I want that. I kind of like I don't want everything to be perfect. Everything is perfect right now where they use the computers. It's perfect. And I get it from a business standpoint. Hey, you want perfection. You can meet your numbers. I mean, at the end of the day, as much as you love wine and I love whiskey, it's all about money.
You're right. I think there must be a good balance if they use it, if the idea behind the processes is coming from a genuine place, people are tasting it, they want to do something. Yeah. And they use the latest technology to try to keep on that path and to achieve it. There might be
But once again, like I look at so for me, I was never really into wine, even though I'm born and raised in Cape Town. Stellenbosch is right there. Yeah. I would drink wine every now and again. But the last 2 years, I've been trying to get into wine because it is a nice social thing to drink. And it's interesting because the tannins in the American wines hurt my kidneys. Like something is wrong. But French Bordeaux, no problem at all. And I'm just like, wow, think of the terrains and think of the technology. Think about how many years those vines have been there. And they could have been there just as long, but let's just say in America, which I don't know if it's true or not, doesn't really matter. But let's just say they said, okay, we're going to change the water. We're going to add something to the water to help. That could be hurting me. Maybe in France, they don't do that. Maybe they do. I don't know. I just know that I cannot drink that. Whatever's coming from here hurts me, but whatever's coming from France doesn't hurt me at all.
That's interesting. Never heard that, but
I don't know
it
what it is, the
might be
tannin
something.
count or what it is, but like my kidneys after like a bottle of red, just like I'm like, oh, it hurts. Drinking these French Bordeaux, nope, not a problem. No idea why. And
Interesting.
all I
And
can
with
think about is terroir. Like it's just a different terrain, and something over here is bothering me, something over there is not bothering me. That's the only
but
difference.
from the US, from every single region, you have the same effect,
Mainly, I mean, I only drink
or
really from Napa
mainly
and
Napa.
from
Okay.
up there, so I don't really
Yeah,
know.
yeah,
I can't like that's what I've always been around. So I
yeah, yeah.
can't say like, oh, the entire United States. So I guess like that part of the country for me doesn't
Hmm.
work well for me.
Maybe something with the terroir, or maybe just the climate. It's warmer. Maybe the red grapes develop these tannins, or the
Yeah, just something with
some
my
of the.
personal body, I can't break it down. So, and I don't know enough, but it's really interesting because I stayed away from wine and then I started drinking these great Bordeaux's and I'm like, oh wow. Like even like not Bordeaux, like a super Tuscan. Like I'll drink that and be like, oh, it's delicious, you know? But for
Yeah,
me, it's
yeah,
like it's the palate. And the whiskey is very interesting because the higher alcohol volume, the harder it is to like get your palate in. It just is
yeah,
you
yeah,
know
yeah.
so like I like high alcohol whiskey, but like I like it from the smell more, and then like I'll move it around my mouth and kind of like really chew on it and taste it
Hmm.
all, and then like break it down a little bit just with my saliva and then swallow it, as opposed to like, oof, that was 70% ABV 140 and you're like, oh, that hurt.
Wow. There are 70% ABV
Oh,
whiskeys, and
I've
what?
got I've got I've got some Willets that are like 142, 144. And let me just tell you, they don't taste like that. That's the crazy thing. They taste at like 120, which is still
Wow.
high. But yeah, big
Yeah.
stuff, especially the bourbon. The bourbons go big. But like on this last trip to Scotland, I drank a bunch of like 116s, 58 fives, 59 fives, 60.3s. That's a lot of alcohol. And you know what the beautiful thing is? All of it was aged. And there's something that the age does, it takes the roughness off.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's interesting. But what is the process that does that in the aging?
I think it just depends. I don't think that I think that they watch it. I think that
Hmm.
the whiskey's going to go into the barrel depending on the whiskey. Most people for Scotch they put it in like in the high 60s. For bourbons they put it in a little higher. But just remember, most whiskey you drank has been cut, meaning they've put water in to kind of bring it
Yeah.
down to a standard level. That stuff's like uncut. I mean, there's a great whiskey brand called Black Adder,
Hmm.
family business, and he buys all these whiskeys from distilleries and he just sits on them, lets them age. But when he bottles them, he just pours it straight out. The char, everything. He doesn't clean it up. He doesn't do anything. So you
Okay.
get like you basically, it's like putting your head in the barrel when you drink it.
Yeah.
And I love those experiences because it's super raw. Now, could I drink that all the time? No. I mean, that wouldn't be I'm not saying it would be unhealthy, but like I'm pretty sure like there's a reason why they filter whiskey.
Of course, of course. For whiskey tastings, what is the process? I've heard that in some places they water up the whiskeys so you can taste a lot of samples and you can feel the aromas better. Or do you do it just raw, or what is the
It
process?
depends. So they always are going to serve you a little dropper with water. So
Okay.
just think of liquid. All liquids, when you change the molecular structure, the liquid changes. So you add a drop of water, it changes. It normally becomes more creamy,
Hmm.
and you get a whole nother flavor, like something that might be like let me try to think of a good example. Some like take chocolate, like really, really dark chocolate. You drink, you eat it, it's bitter, but
Yeah.
and if that's the whiskey flavor, it's like, oh, it's a little bitter. But if you add a drop of water, it almost becomes like milk chocolate. Oh,
I
wait,
see.
it just changes. I tell people if the best way to change the molecular structure for me personally is I always keep some bottles in the freezer, because freezing it, obviously it's not going to freeze, but it changes
Yeah.
it changes the molecular structure, and it can calm the whiskey down. Like sometimes I won't say the whiskey's angry, but it's high ABV. It's like
Mm.
it wants to make a point. It's yelling. A little bit of water can make it talk nicer.
I see.
So that's what every whiskey tasting will have water droppers. I personally don't use them. I don't add water too much to my whiskey, but like you're getting like a quarter ounce. I normally I always smell. I smell like 3 times. You know, I don't like to swirl it because it aggravates the liquid. And then what you do is you just get this like huge hit of vapor to your face. You know, because you're swirling it, it's gonna come like, you know, it wants to. The high alcohol vapors want to come in straight up into your nose. So I'll normally sip it, and then sniff it. Then I take a sip, and I what I call chew. I just like around my whole mouth, and you coat your mouth. And what I'm looking for there is the oiliness, the viscosity. Now another way to see that is if you lean the glass, you see the legs run down, same as in wine, and you can see, you know, like, oh, this is oily. This is, you know, might be high in peat. This might be high in sherry. You know, who knows? But then, you know, take 1 or 2 sips and then move on to the next one. Exactly. Like the biggest question you ask is, why is older whiskey so different to younger whiskey? And my answer is always like, older whiskey is calm. Younger whiskey is still too talkative. It's too chatty. There's too much going on. When you let that whiskey just sit in a barrel for 30, 40, 50 years, everybody just starts to play nicely together. If you put them in, like, pull them out of 10, they barely got to know each other. Still could be good because the liquid's good. But for me, like, they haven't had a chance to, like, just make peace with each other and be like, all right, let's do our thing together. Because you got all these sugars going on. I mean, you got so much stuff going on in the barrel. You got whatever was in the barrel, what's out of the barrel. You've got contrasting, expanding. You got the whole thing. It all changes.
Yeah, that's a beautiful analogy. Making friends with each other.
It's just like, you know, because, you know, like first day at school, you don't know anybody, and it's going to be okay. But like 3-4 years into it, you're all friends. You're like a group. You know, like I think that's what I appreciate the most from the older whiskeys. Is like, and then I'm always like in awe. I'm like, whoa, that's so crazy that barrel just sat in the corner, just minding its own business. Like they don't really touch it; they just leave it, and they know, like, it's crazy because I don't know how it is in wine because you guys are all in caves, but in the distilleries they have like multiple levels, and they know like, oh, the top left-hand corner, like that one gets sunlight the most, and that's going to do this to the whiskey. And the bottom right corner, oh, there's a wind that comes in, and that's going to do that. And the guys who manage that are like magicians. They know exactly where to put the whiskey and what to do with it. And that to me is like 90% of it, because where you put it's like, it's the difference between having a good night's sleep and a bad night's sleep, or being too hot or too cold. So finding the perfect balance for the whiskey is part of the whole show.
Of course, and they are tasting it always every single month. I would say.
I think longer than that. Generally, they know what it's going to be. If that's going to be, I mean, I don't know, to be honest. I've never actually asked. It's a good question. I should ask that. Like, how often? I now know with the computers, they probably don't taste it ever, because the computer says, "Oh, today this thing went like 1 millimeter higher in sugar. Oh, today it dropped 5." I don't know.
Yeah, but are the computers connected to each barrel? Is it for the barrel aging, or for the? I thought that the computers are helping with the fermentation and the distillery.
I mean, it looks like when you see some of these barrels look like if you and me were going to go to the hospital and you got like 12 things on your chest. You know, this one might be measuring the humidity in the warehouse. This one is measuring the sugar content. This one is, I mean, I don't know what's going on. I'm going to ask that question next time, because all I see is lots of shit with computers.
Okay, I see. Maybe there are some automation systems for the filling up the barrels.
Yeah, I mean, because you just remember, you also get the evaporation, the natural evaporation. Even though it's secure, it gets out. You know, they call that the angel share. So let's just say you put 300 liters in. You know, in 10 years, you're going to have like 275, and I'm making up numbers. In 50 years, you might have, of the 300 liters, you might have 120.
Yeah.
It's gone, you know?
Yeah. That's why that is one of the reasons why the older the whiskey, it's more expensive usually.
Well, they just don't have the yield. But then I look at it, then I look at it and go, when you made that whiskey 50 years ago, it probably didn't cost you very much.
Yeah.
And I don't care if you only have 120 liters left. I don't know how you justify $100,000 per bottle, because I guarantee the whole bottle 50 years ago, the whole barrel didn't cost you more than like 10 grand.
Yeah.
But this is
Yeah.
also a market. You see it in wine. Different wines worth different values. It just is. I mean, there's a lot of marketing, of course, behind it. And most of it deserves it. I mean, I'm totally fine with paying a premium for great stuff. I'm okay with it.
But I think also one thing to consider is the labor for all those years, because as you mentioned, you don't just keep the barrel in the corner and leave it. You have to take care of it. You have to pay attention. So if we would calculate
there's
all the
maintenance. Yeah,
labor and
100%. There's
everything,
rent. There's liability. There's all of that. Yes,
yeah,
agree.
yeah.
But it is pretty
So-
crazy. I mean, because I look at Macallan's done a couple now at those 1926s that have been north of like $2 million every time they go on auction.
Yeah.
Think like that's crazy. And then obviously I watch wine. I mean, I'm an investor and I look at some of these cases and I'm just like, whoa. Like the thing with wine is, as you know very well, and all your listeners, like you have a limited time to enjoy the bottle once you open it.
Yeah.
It's the reality. With whiskey, you can open it, close it, drink it for the next 20 years if you want. It doesn't, if you just push it down really good, like you don't have to worry about it.
Oh, so I didn't know that you can keep it for so long. I
So
obviously
long.
I knew
And
that.
now, listen,
Wow.
don't get me wrong. It gets a little oxidized, but it's oxidized because they're not taking care of it. Meaning, they just didn't push it all the way in. Like they're using the same things that you use in wine to pull the oxygen out. They're using that in whiskey right now in some of the bars, because you might get a guy like me. Like I was in Vegas and I drank a Springbank 25. And a Springbank 25 is a pretty delicious whiskey. Got a lot going on, tons of flavor. And when I drank it, I was like, it's like a little flat.
Okay.
So I asked, how long have you had the bottle? Oh, we've had the bottle 7 years. When was the last time somebody got a pour? 3 years ago.
Oh, wow.
Can you try it? So the guy put the straw in, he says, oh yeah, oxidized. I said, listen, I'm not going to be an asshole, but like, yeah, it's all right. But yeah,
Wow,
whiskey stays, there's really nothing. I mean, and it's really easy to maintain. And I think, that's why I have 300 open bottles. Like, trust me, like they're not oxidizing. Like maybe in 20 years, you come say to me like, that one doesn't taste as good. Okay. I mean, it's not being touched a lot.
Yeah.
So that's the big thing. Like when I go to these big events and I have a wine guy and I go, why are you here? I like whiskey that you don't have to finish it. I can go buy a $20,000 bottle, open it and drink it for the next 10 years. If I drink a bottle of $20,000 wine, I got to finish it.
That's just a half an hour. You don't even have a lot of time at the dinner. If you buy an old wine, that is
and then the moment has passed. The moment has passed. And the only way to recreate is open another one. So
that's an interesting comparison, and I never thought about that. So how do you go about starting a whiskey collection? How did you start it? How do you select whiskeys for the collection?
I use a lot of my gut. So I knew that there's something different with Japanese whiskey, but I didn't know. I just my intellect said, something interesting. Like I said earlier, I'm gonna buy them, and what's the worst case scenario? I drink them.
Yeah.
And then they started going up in value. And then I got into bourbon. And a friend of mine told me about Michter's whiskey. So I bought a lot of Suntory. For Japanese, I bought a ton. Whiskey auctions, stores, everywhere. Anywhere I could buy it, I was buying and buying and buying. And then a friend of mine told me about this bourbon called Michter's. And I tried it, and I'm like, oh, this is great. I never even drank American whiskey before. This is delicious. So I started buying it as well. And like those two, if I look at my 800 and something bottles, I've got about 250 Japanese, and then about 200 just Michter's.
Wow.
Going back to like 2012. And then I have a ton of other stuff, scotches and other American whiskeys and stuff like that. But like half of my collection is like two companies.
That's
that
interesting.
I totally took a gamble on. And it's paid off. It will pay off. I hope it pays off. I mean, I don't know. We're still 8 years, 7.5, 8 years away. I don't know if it pays off. My intentions when I look at what I paid and what it's worth, it's paying off. But, Nothing is worth anything until you actually sell it and get the money.
Exactly.
In paper money, everything looks great, but it's on paper. Nothing's happened.
So do you have like charts? Are you following the
I don't. I
value?
also, because I do it for, I've been doing it for so long. Like I watch things. So I watch every auction. Like this morning, the Sotheby's one closed. I watch every auction and I look for patterns. I also look for nostalgia and limited. So when I buy something, it's normally a very limited run. Like they didn't release 80,000 bottles a week. But don't get me wrong, I do have some bottles that they did do that. Great marketing. Just happens. I look for bottles that were from a long time ago, and the reason why I do is that means they've been opened and drank, and there's not many left in the world.
Yeah.
Like those are generally my criteria, and I look and I buy whiskeys from companies that I know, like tomorrow, if I needed to sell, everybody would knows what it is. I didn't go find some Gavin whiskey that nobody knows about and buy 100 cases that nobody cares about. I buy stuff that's big names, but great whiskey. And then I buy on relationships. If I spend time at a distillery and figure out like their secret sauce, like they're onto something, then I go invest in the old stuff, knowing you can't do that again.
Yeah.
That's been my thing from the beginning, like low yield, older, because that just means there's less available in the world. You got to drive a premium. I mean, like I said, you can't microwave it. You can't recreate a 1980 Macallan. You just can't.
Exactly. Are there like ageability differences between whiskeys? Maybe some whiskeys are not aging so well. And
I don't know, to be honest. I'm sure it happens. I just haven't. I mean, just remember when they bottle it, the aging stops. So that's it. It's done. It's not like wine where it sits on the shelf. Like if I go buy this year's vintage, they say, "Oh, it's really good to drink in 8 years." Whiskey's done. This is it. Finished. The process has stopped. Nothing else is happening in the bottle.
Not even like minor changes. Maybe in like 20, 30 years.
Only climate. Like literally climate, meaning like your house temperature, is going to change the alcohol. And that's mainly oxygen. I don't think like if you store your whiskey in the sun, that's probably not too good, But other than that, like I've never been like, I mean, and every now and again you hear of like in wine, you hear of corked whiskey. Somebody opens it up and like whenever they put it in, something went wrong. It happened like there's a lot of whiskeys from like 1960s and 70s that they used to make in these like decanters. They look beautiful, cars and eagles and all this stuff. I mean, especially American whiskey. They would make it very like, because nobody was drinking it. So they figured if you make it look like something fun, people would buy it. A car, a horse, the eagle. But the problem was the lid on that thing wasn't very good. So people get so excited because they're like, oh my God, I found like a 1982 Michter's bourbon. I'm going to pay all this money. And then they open it. They're like, oh God, that tastes terrible. Yeah. It's like, first of all, in those, I think whiskey should just stay in glass bottles. So anytime you go put it in anything else, like who knows what it turns out like.
Yeah.
Because of the, just remember, whiskey wants to go into all the holes. It likes to go. That's what it does in a barrel. It's porous. So if you put it in something that's maybe not like a glass, like I can't even think what the name of these decanters, but like I've had good ones and had bad ones. I was in Kentucky and we had these old Jim Beams and they were phones. Like remember the old phone where you put your finger around? And these guys bought a dozen of them and we opened it up and it was disgusting. It was like just like to the point where like I hope we don't get sick from drinking that, but like it just wasn't sealed well, and it wasn't meant to be good whiskey. See, that's the other problem. Like those things were not meant to be, oh my God, this is good whiskey. This was more like, hey, we can't sell the whiskey, but if we put it in a phone, somebody will buy it.
Yeah, it was more about the show.
Like Japanese whiskey is synonymous. Like they did a whole musical items. They got like trumpets, flutes, pianos. They put the whiskey in there like, well, maybe somebody will buy a piano more than a Japanese whiskey. Hey, there's whiskey in it. It's funny. Like this like in the 1980s, nobody wanted the whiskey. Nobody. People were drinking vodka and gin and schnapps and wine and champagne. There wasn't like whiskey, very few. And now you look, man, there's whiskey bars, whiskey clubs, whiskey everything.
It's interesting, but what was the reason? Why not whiskey?
I think there was a price issue.
Okay, yeah.
I think it was really like, there was very few. Like when I interview people on my podcast, we talk about what was your first experience. It's almost always Johnny Walker.
Yeah.
They grew up and they saw Johnny walker. Doesn't matter where they are in the world, Johnny Walker.
If I'm really thinking about it, maybe that was the first whiskey experience for me as well.
Yeah, Johnny Walker Black or Red seems to be like, I swear, 90% of the people's first whiskey experience. Now, there's also Chivas and Bell's and J&B, that was around. But like Johnny Walker, it's everywhere. Everybody saw it. And to think like, and you must maybe understand this in wine, like, that the prices of these bottles could go to the moon. So it's kind of crazy when you drink something super expensive and you're like, I'm just trying to understand, why is that bottle $50,000?
Yeah.
Same in wine. I watch some of the stuff and you're like, I'm just trying to understand why it's that much.
Yeah. What is the most special bottle that you have in your collection?
I have a 2014 Michter's 25-year-old rye. I don't think that there's more. I mean, I'm speculating here. I don't think that there's more than 25 bottles left in the world.
25 bottles.
And the whole run was only 104.
Yeah.
So like that,
crazy.
And I've tasted it. It's phenomenal. It's like, bourbon whiskey's got this caramel and vanilla and almost like candy notes. It's like, it's that whiskey you sit back and you go, I'm okay if I never drink again. I'm good. This is it. I've got from Suntory at Narita Airport in Japan. They used to sell limited editions, Yamazaki 25, Hakushu 25, Hibiki 30. Super limited, beautiful artwork around it. I have one of each. Those are very special too, because like once again, those were 200 ever released.
Yeah, those are
because
special.
In that time, nobody would pay $2,200 for a whiskey. You were like crazy.
Yeah.
Like that's the thing that changes. Like when I look at my prize stuff, it's like, it's because the whiskey that I bought, it was too expensive. But they didn't know how great it was, but it was just too expensive. I mean, if you look now in 2024 and wine lists and whiskey lists and you see how much the prices are, you're like, whoa, that's kind of crazy. A glass of wine in a restaurant, $45 for a glass, not a bottle.
Yeah.
It's normal. I see whiskey. I mean, I saw a chat the other day about tipping for whiskey. Okay. And these guys were saying, like, what's the difference on tipping for a $250 pour of whiskey or a $10 pour of whiskey? It's just whiskey. The guy did the same thing. Why do you think that guy needs more money on the bigger one and the other guy needs less? Like, we got to figure this out, because if you're going to have a big whiskey bill, you kind of like, but if I would have had a cheap whiskey bill, the job is the same. Exactly.
And with tens of thousands of dollar bottle whiskey, then 10% tip is going to be quite high.
But you're like, well, what if he just had a Johnny Walker Black? He did the same job.
Exactly.
I gave the guy $25. It's good. Why I got to tip $2,000 for the same job?
Exactly.
It's not like food. It's not like food where there's like more cooking and stuff involved. This is just like, hey, you just got the bottle, poured the bottle.
He had more responsibility, maybe.
Yeah, maybe.
The insurance. Which cheaper whiskey was the one that significantly exceeded your expectations? Like the one that has great price to value ratio?
Jack Daniel's.
Jack Daniel's, okay.
Jack Daniel's, I swear, I went there 5 years ago. They did nothing. They did like 6 items. And I kept on saying, why don't you do more? Oh, nobody wants more from us. And in the last 3 years, they've done a lot more, and you're like, wow. Because the price is normal. Like a Jack Daniel 10-year-old, a Jack Daniel 12-year-old, like it's delicious Tennessee whiskey, and it's under $100, under $150. That to me would be the one that's like an international phenomenon. That was $40 whiskey, great $30 whiskey, great $25 whiskey. And now they have like 80, 90, 100. But also remember, your question's loaded because what's cheap to me might be expensive for somebody else.
Yeah, of course. But in general, whiskey is not a really cheap drink. So
No,
even the
expected.
starter ones are, yeah, yeah. It would be impossible to produce it really cheaply. What are some misconceptions around whiskey that you are encountering in your whiskey?
That it's not going to taste good, or that like peated whiskey is disgusting, or sherry.
Peated whiskey. What is peated whiskey?
So they use this peat. It's like a, I don't know, explain. It's almost like a mud. It's like squares, but it like when you burn it, it gives off a flavor,
Okay.
and that flavor to the whiskey adds like there's no better way of saying it. Like almost like if you ran in socks in a field and your socks got wet, it's a very interesting water that you would be drinking. That to me is peat.
I see.
You know, and I don't want to say it's dirty socks, but it's peat. It's just different.
Yeah, yeah.
It's not sherry,
Yeah.
which is sweet and yummy. Peat is more like, whoa, that's crazy. And I never used to like it, but then I realized that all these blends I've been drinking forever all are peated. So now I've started being going. So I think the misconception that if, you know, I wouldn't recommend if you've never drank scotch to go with a heavily peated. I recommend you go with something more sherry, just to get your palate in. And then bourbons are a whole different game. Like I like ryes, but ryes are spicy.
Yeah.
American bourbon is more sweet. American rye is more spicy. I like the spicy one. So if you've never drank bourbon whiskey, I wouldn't be like, oh, you should go try a rye. I'd be like, no, just do like a regular bourbon whiskey and see how that tastes for you.
Yeah.
So I think the misconception is most of the time I'm not going to like it because they've had a bad experience. If you didn't like something and you picked up a peated whiskey, you'd be like, that is disgusting. Never again am I going to try it. But you didn't try all the different scotches. If you picked up an American rye, perhaps, and you're like, oh no, that's too much, you know. So it's just re-educating. Don't give up, I think, is the most common, you know. And then there's some people that just don't like it, and that's okay too.
Of course, of course. Yeah, I've met a lot of people who had this situation that they tried one very weird or cheaper whiskey that they had a bad experience with, and then they say that I don't like whiskey. And it's the same with wine and with everything. So you have to be open-minded.
Well, like for me, just think about it. Like I never tried Bordeaux until 2 years ago. So I was just like, oh, all the wine hurts me. I can't drink any wine. You know, it's just it's a personal thing. If you're willing to try. If not, listen. I think that the education at bars is way higher now. So I think if you walk in and say, hey, I had a bad experience, the bartender will be like, try this. But also remember, it's very high alcohol, and high alcohol is not for everybody. It really is.
Yeah.
And if that's not your thing, then whiskey's just not going to be your thing. But then I would recommend, if you really want whiskey, put it on ice. But listen, there's a million other drinks you can drink. Don't worry, you know, like go try something else. You don't have to love whiskey.
Of course, of course. What are some exciting projects for you that you could share?
So right now, I'm trying to get the website back up and running smoothly. So that's a big project because I made all these hats, Make Whiskey Great Again.
Yeah.
Like 5 years ago, and I've sold thousands, and I never did it through a shop. It was all through like DMs. So now I'm going to have the shop up and running. I took an equity position in a company called Rare Pours, US based, and we're going to do whiskey auction. I'm looking to do my own whiskey. We just raised money.
Oh, really?
And my whiskey is going to be for cocktails. It's not going to be for sipping. So that's keeping me pretty busy, to be honest. And then the whole Instagram thing, like I love it. I love having fun. I mean, I tell people, they're like, how did you get so many followers? I'm like, I do it every day. Like if you want to be good at anything, you got to do your repetitions. You got to practice.
Yeah.
You got to keep doing it every single day. It's not just, and I'm loving my podcast. Like I'm bringing on these truly passionate whiskey people who are just like, they've been around so much, and I'm humbled that they take the time to talk to me and just like tell me everything that they've seen in their lives. So I'm enjoying it. Busy.
Exactly. That's the way to do it. If you are passionate about something and you do it,
100%.
repeat it, that's how you build trust. So I think this is a great closing. I would call our followers and listeners to check out Gavin's podcast, check out his Instagram, because he's sharing truly amazing and interesting knowledge about whiskey. And thanks for watching, and see you in the next episode. Thank
I
you for doing
appreciate
this,
it so
Gavin.
much. Thank you so much for having me on. That was awesome.